longevity lifestyle designers. This is Gavin here with secretsoflongevity.com. This is a video response of one of my videos. You can either check out this video here to see the video that was being responded to, and below that video is the video response. Or if this video is approved as a video response to the video that's responding to me, you can see that below. In just above where you would leave a comment, there should say what video this is a video response to. But it has to be approved for that to happen. Apologize if that intro was slightly confusing. For the remainder of this video, I'm going to be talking as if I'm talking directly to Jolita, who's the one who made the first video response to me. We'd had some exchanges in comments both on that video, but also previously on other videos. At that time, Jolita had a very odd way of coming to her conclusions and in her responses to me, which clearly showed to me that she wasn't basing things on logic. But this video response was a little better. But then again, once again in the comments, there's again all this finicky stuff. And I'll show you a screenshot on the screen here in a second, which shows a lack of basic reasoning skills displayed by this person. That's just my conclusion based on this. It's not me insulting her. It's not me saying that her points are wrong in her video. We're going to get to that. And I wanted to bring up these issues first with you, Jolita, just because, you know, there doesn't seem to be any reasoning to you. I say something, I say, this is what I'm saying, and you're saying, no, that's not what you're saying. To give you some context, Jolita was bringing up the fact that she was going to make a video response, and I just brought up the points of what I accept as video responses on my videos. I don't just let any random person make a video response to me. I've had people just make video responses where they were completely rude and making ad hominems, personal attacks. I've had people use my own content in making a video response, and I had to flag the video and tell them to take it down because that's copyright violation. That's per YouTube's policies. I've had people, you know, make a response and it just makes no sense because there's no logical basis underneath what they're doing, and they haven't actually responded to what I've brought up in the video. That actually happened with the last fruitarian character. That was attempting to dismiss my arguments, and I did do one video response to him. You can actually see that on my channel on the playlist of video responses. You might remember that one is the jungle surfer guy. And you know, the first video was valid. He didn't actually address anything in my video, but he raised some points. I countered them. But then he just made another video making the same point. So of course I'm not going to approve that because that's just wasting my time and him trying to get attention for his channel that has less views. So Jolita, I was simply pointing that out to you, and you seem to think that this was disrespectful, that I was trying to conclude that you were going to do that, when my wording was that I'm just letting you know this is how I work. But again, as you see with these comments here, which is just a fragment of the discussion that we were having on that video. You kept pushing this idea that I'm purposely trying to disrespect you. So that just simply wasn't the case, and I brought up the fact that, you know, maybe it's your lack of ability to grasp the English language if it's not your first language. You know, my secondary language is French. I don't have the best ability to communicate with it, but I'm very proficient at it, and I think it's fantastic you're making videos. I mentioned it's not because of your accent, and then you went and took that and thought I was insulting your accent when I just said that I wasn't doing that. So again, there's this slight irrationality to your methods of argument, which I encourage you to step up the game on, because it just makes you look more foolish than you already are when you have these stances that are based in bad science, as we're going to get to as the main part of this video. So the fact that I block people or choose not to respond to people doesn't mean I'm dismissive. It means that I have time, and I use my time accordingly. I don't have time for people that make petty arguments, don't know how to use evidence to respond, and then use evidence to back up their new stance that they're creating as a response. And of course then there's spammers and other people doing other non-integrous things. So first things first, you were criticizing me for making the conclusion that vegans are uneducated. As explained in my video, which wasn't that all vegans are uneducated, the ones that seem to be out there promoting things tend to be uneducated. There's still very few people that have challenged me on things that actually had legitimate scientific basis for what they're coming to me with. The vast majority of commenters, video responses and other things tend to be really poorly thought out. And if they haven't already been disproven in the video they're responding to, then it was something that I already covered in another video, which is why I often just simply link to older videos and not going to spend my time reiterating something that has clearly been communicated in a previous video with the evidence all right there below the video. So the overarching problem with the arguments you use in your video response is that they're observational, and that means correlation. So you observe that Einstein's a vegetarian, and thus vegetarian you can be smart as a vegetarian. That's one person. This isn't science. That doesn't make anything a causation. So that phrase, correlation does not equal causation, also applies to epidemiology. And when it comes to addressing that, because you used that as some of your points, I'll be bringing up that phrase again to hammer that point home. Because very few people, and especially I see it most prevalently in raw veganism, think that correlation equals causation. So you brought up people like Einstein, Gandhi, and Sting are vegetarian. Thus, vegetarians must be able to be like those things. You can look at any one person and take any example of something in their lifestyle and say, this causes that. You could take the fact that Einstein was born into a Jewish home and say, Jewish people that are born into a Jewish family are going to be smarter. That's a correlation. That's an observation not based on sound science. You also mentioned something that you mentioned at other times in your video, that people with cancer, you've seen them recover from going onto a vegan or vegetarian diet, raw food diet. So have I. That doesn't mean shit at all. There's someone that I was just at a memorial for this weekend who happened to have died of cancer, and she had gone to the Hippocrates Health Institute, done the whole program. It probably lengthened her life a little bit, but unfortunately she passed away. And I've seen other people that went to Hippocrates who died. I've seen people who went to Hippocrates and flourished. I've seen people go to other programs and flourish, whether raw vegan or paleo. My own aunt had breast cancer and went the paleo route, and 5 years later, after recovering from breast cancer without chemotherapy, she won the women's national tennis doubles championship, of all of Canada, with her partner in the women's over 50 group. He also made some attacks on my character, and this again is falling into the category of logical fallacies, ad hominems. He used the word, what you say unto others is a reflection of what you're actually saying about yourself, or what you mean about yourself. So by me calling out vegans for their lack of scientific credibility, somehow that makes me scientifically non-credible. That doesn't even make sense. I get what you're saying with that phrase, but you can't just throw it out willy-nilly and slap it on people thinking that it's going to stick, when sometimes people actually say something because they're observing it in someone, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're that themselves. So if you want to show me as being not credibly when it comes to science, you have to actually take my points and break them down. Not me as a person, but my points, the science. That's what I tell people day in and day out on my channel. And the confidence that I convey in that stance is what some people call arrogance, because I come up against it constantly. And people don't like to listen to facts. They want to, stick to their rigid dogmatic beliefs, and sometimes it takes some force to get the point through. So the overall video you're responding to, very soon in your video said, I'm actually going to talk about these other things. I agree with you. So the actual video response itself is kind of pointless, considering you agreed with it, but you're trying to then make more points, which I'm fine with responding to, even though it's really not the criteria I have for making a video response. And that was that we have all these physiological changes that indicate that we're omnivores. You agreed, but then at other points you were also saying that we weren't. So even though you opened up with saying, I agree with you, we're going to now look at the effects of illnesses and things on people. And sporadically through your video, you attempted to actually negate that. So I'd encourage you to get your actual stance more concrete before making a video response to someone in the future. So then you went on to try and talk about the teeth, to say the sharpness of the teeth today. And I was making the point that indicates that we ate meat because of the flatter teeth that our Australopithecus ancestors had were broader, flatter, made for chewing and grinding vegetation in greater amounts than modern humans, which again have those points. They're better for tearing, and that demonstrated that with the link to the video in that original video. You were trying to make the point that the sharpness of the teeth, and this wasn't based on anything that you had evidence for, but you were just saying, you see sharp teeth in apes and things that are more frugivorous, and that they're signs of status. That simply doesn't hold any weight, because we're talking about the molars, first of all, which aren't seen at the front. Yes, the canines could be argued as being something that's a status symbol, but in humans they're even smaller than they are in chimpanzees, so we don't actually have them for status. And you were trying to say males have bigger ones than females. I've never seen that in people. To me, males and females have similarly sized canines. They're obviously going to be bigger if someone's a bigger person, but they're not more prominent in males than females. You look at baboons, which have massive fangs, and yes, it's a status thing in baboons. That's well accepted. Less so in the other apes, but that's simply not true about humans. it's pretty conclusive that we developed this trait, this sharper teeth, for tearing through meat. Raw, 2.6 million years ago, and then over time when we began cooking meat, approximately 1 million to 500,000 years ago, that's still continued that adaptation of sharper molars, sharper teeth all around for utilizing flesh as our main source of calories. By the way, anything I link to in the video, whether it's another YouTube video or a study, I'm not sure if I'm going to actually link to anything in this video, much of anything, probably just a few videos. I'll post the links in the description below. They're going to just appear in the order that I mentioned them, and I'll have a number beside them. So the next thing you talked about was a Finnish study from the Netherlands. Again, you didn't actually link to it, so I'd encourage you to do that if you're going to use a study to back up your stance so we can actually look at it. I have heard of it, and it's some of these wartime type studies. There was one done in the UK on the changes in disease states correlated to diet at the time of war, and this one was around the time of a famine, and there wasn't much animal foods in the diet, and so the claim is made in this correlative study, again, correlation does not equal causation, that animal foods, because they dropped and we see these other diseases start to lower in these time periods, that means animal foods cause these things. Yet, there's a whole host of other factors that aren't taken into account. During a famine, you're eating lower calories all around, both from starches, grains, fruit, and animal foods, and everything else. You also have the less sugar in the diet. You have less processed foods in the diet. So all these things, lower calories, we already see reduced disease rates when calories go down anyways. In those who consume too many calories, they're going to have disease states. And then when you add in the reduction of junk foods and also perhaps more exercise, because people are out doing things to try and get by. You know, they might be doing their own garden, which was the case in the UK. All these things where you're more active, trying to survive, essentially, you're going to be in a healthier position because you're getting away from the more sedentary lifestyle and the processed foods, the excess calories, and that's going to, of course, lead to better health. You can't pin animal foods as the cause of that. Then, of course, there's my all-time favorite line, read the China study. Despite the fact that if you were to go back to my videos to the very beginning, you'd hear me talking about the China study with so much vigor, just like everyone else. I listened to it, actually had the audiobook form of it 4 or 5 times over the course of me being in that vegan state of mind. And when I actually started to read the responses to that, that quickly changed my opinion on it, even as I maintained veganism, just because simply you cannot have correlated studies trying to indicate causation. T. Colin Campbell himself says that he believes correlation does equal causation, and that's a fundamental flaw in his belief system that tries to make it so that his work is reflected as fact when it's simply not in the slightest. Nothing from the China study was actually posted in any mainstream medical journal. Yes, they did use data from the study that was done in China, which wasn't called the China study, it had a much longer name. That got published, but it wasn't exclusively under his name. T. Colin Campbell has some studies published under his name that were done in other ways, but nothing from the actual book, the China study, ended up in any medical journal. Breaking down the China study is a topic for another video. It's one I've been talking about doing for a long time. I definitely have to get on that, and I will be doing that I'm going to say in 2 weeks I'm going to try and have that video up, and I encourage you to check that out once it's up. Another point you tried to raise around trying to dismiss the video you responded to when you had already said you agreed with it was the idea that apes had, and our ancestors, Australopithecus afarensis, had a larger abdomen, which is, fact. We have the fucking skeletons, but you link to images of apes compared to humans, and they're, first of all, from the side, the images, so it doesn't show the way the ribs flare out in these other species, and how humans, we have a very narrow rib cage. It's not really a valid comparison when you consider chimps have flared out ribs. I gave the link in my original video, which you dismissed, saying, where is this from? Some blah 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 book. Well, it was a book on the UCLA website. It's an educational website. So to try and just dismiss that is really foolish. It makes you look really uneducated. The fact that you can't just acknowledge the fact that this is a scientific site. This isn't me just pulling some random image and trying to claim it as something that isn't legit. Is, you want to be taken seriously, you got to start thinking seriously, not just dismissing something because it happens to rub your emotional investment in your dietary paradigm the wrong way. All the great apes have wide abdomens for digesting more fiber, much more food in higher volume, and humans, it's tapered down, shrunk, and we see this clearly when comparing our current digestive systems and width of our whole abdomen to our current state. So you were actually even trying to say that the rib cage itself, which that's up here. Our digestive system isn't up here. This is our lungs. You're saying the lungs in the rib cage are large in humans. We're talking about the abdomen, the belly. The abdomen's down here, not the thoracic cavity. You're throwing out all sorts of remarks with no backing whatsoever. Humans get cancer in the digestive system from eating animal foods. Yeah, people get cancers for all sorts of reasons, but there's nothing that indicates exclusively that it is caused from animal foods, and specifically pasture-raised, free-range animal foods, which is what us in the paleo/whole food, omnivore type paradigm are recommending. So to be able to say that as a point, you have to have a scientific study that backs it up, that is laboratory done, not these food questionnaires or these large epidemiological studies that can't come up with anything actually causative and show very clearly that this is the case. There's definitely people that do better on lower animal foods. There's people that do better on higher animal foods. I happen to be someone that does great on higher animal foods, and that's something I've talked exhaustively about on my channel. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to be going into the differences in people for those reasons. But that is actually also another factor that comes into this whole thing. You see people that recover from cancer because they're eating some crazy diet with tons of processed food, maybe too much animal foods for their unique constitution, and when they change that, yes, they get better. Take someone like my aunt, who was vegetarian vegan. She was eating way too much plant foods for her unique O blood type, and over time, when she changed to a paleo, high-fat, high-protein animal foods-based diet, she reversed her health issues. You then start getting really finicky, again, totally off topic from the original video, that there's not much nutrition in animal foods. There's no fiber. Yeah, of course there's no fiber. Just because something doesn't have fiber doesn't mean that it has to have it for it to be healthy. You can get fiber from someone else if you need that. I've made videos in the past about how I eat very little fiber and have the best digestive health I've ever had before. It's when I eat more fiber that I have more digestive distress, and a lot of people can concur with that. There's no water in animal foods. There's tons of water in animal foods. A steak is about 70% water. What do you think comes off it when you put it on a grill or into the oven? It's called steam. It's coming from water evaporating off of it. If it was less than 20% water, it would be hard and chewy. A cell contains water. It has to dehydrate to lose its water. Animal foods and plant foods both have water in the cells. This is basic biology. I encourage you to go out and read some books on biology to learn about that. Yes, a steak or hamburger meat or an egg doesn't have as much water as celery. So what? It's 10-20% difference, tops. If you want to get more water, it's called taking a cup, filling it with water, and drinking it down. Minerals and vitamins in animal foods have been shown to be way higher than, and not to mention more accessible than in plant foods. Please show me some actual scientific data that shows this. I don't have the time to pick apart every single point, and it's dragging the video on to counter these illogical, uneducated points that you're raising. Your points about cholesterol, saturated fat, etc. are more vegan dogma. I can cover this completely in this video here, which you can check out. I encourage you to watch all the way through and check the scientific references on there to learn about the truth around the fact that cholesterol is harmless when we consume it. High cholesterol doesn't mean anything. It's total cholesterol is just an amalgamation of all the cholesterol in your body. There's high density lipoprotein, there's medium density lipoprotein, there's low density lipoprotein, there's very low density lipoprotein, and all HDL and LDL mean, because we know those terms, HDL means taking cholesterol from the tissues back to the liver to be processed. LDL means it's on the way out to the tissues to give the body the cholesterol it needs to build hormones, cell membranes, and also transport the vital nutrients that are fat soluble that our body needs to put into every cell in our body. So VLDL is really where the main problem is, that very low density lipoprotein, which is actually raised by high triglycerides, which as we know is raised by high carbohydrate consumption in the vast majority of people. And the VLDL particles, because they're so small, very low density, and they're hard. They get stuck in the walls of the arteries and they cause inflammation, and the fats oxidize, the cholesterol oxidizes. So it's not cholesterol itself that causes any problem. Plaque is the amalgamation, which again is covered in that video in great detail, of polyunsaturated fats, rancid cholesterol, the buildup of white blood cells from the inflammation, and the buildup of scar tissue, fibrosis. All these things build up, that cap, and when that ruptures, then you can have a heart attack, an aneurysm, a stroke. But that total cholesterol number has nothing to do with this. If you want to actually consider a healthy cardiovascular system, what you need to be looking at is the triglyceride ratio to the HDL ratio. When HDL is too low, health problems ensue no matter where LDL is at. When triglycerides are too high, when that's correlated quite well with VLDL, then that can be an issue as well, of course. So again, watch that video, get educated. Don't be using this nonsense-based old paradigm of the diet heart hypothesis. It's never been proven. Ansel Keys was very misguided, and it's unfortunate that today we have such a strong lobby for corn oil, soy oil, and all these things that are high in polyunsaturated fats that cause a great deal of damage to people's overall health. Your comments on ketosis were so uneducated, it's not funny. Covered in this video again, still up there. Ketosis has never been connected with heart organ failure, kidney stones. What has been connected is ketoacidosis, which is a very rare condition that comes from type 1 diabetes. And that actually happens from being on a high carbohydrate diet, where someone goes into a diabetic state, type 1 diabetes, and their body is unable to process the sugar, so it starts breaking down its own fat. And for a number of reasons, which is way too complex, again, to cover in this shorter video, is it go into ketoacidosis. Again, look up ketosis and look up ketoacidosis. They're two completely different things. I've heard people try to make this argument many times before, and it's uneducated. It's pathetic that they continue to push it when the information's been put out there by me correcting these people. And if you continue to teach something that's illogical and not based in anything factual, then shame on you. You call yourself a health educator, but you're going to purposely ignore something just to stick to an old paradigm that you feel is right for you. That's very shameful. The next point about parasites and bacteria, we find that everywhere in our world. These aren't things to be afraid of. If you really need to cook something so you feel safe to eat it, then by all means do that. When you're consuming foods and animal foods and plant foods from local sources that aren't heavily processed, that aren't left out obviously in long periods of time to be exposed, except for in the unique case when we want to consume some of those things in their fermented state. But for the majority of foods that we want fresh, eat them fresh. Be aware of how they're processed and harvested or slaughtered, and you can avoid these things quite easily. Our own body's natural mechanisms of our stomach acid deals with parasites, bacteria that could get into us from these foods with great ease. Speaking of stomach acid, you actually made a point which is really foolish of you to make, considering you're responding to a video. You obviously didn't listen to it very carefully, which one would normally do if you're making a video response. That the pH of stomach acid in humans is less than that of cats and dogs and other carnivores. I give the reference in the video. Watch the video again if you have to. There's no difference in stomach acid pH. Humans have perfect amount of stomach acid to be able to eat an omnivorous diet. We don't have the stomach acid throughout our entire digestive system like cats and dogs do. Those are carnivores. I made the case pretty clear in that video that humans are omnivores, not carnivores. So the comparison to that is illogical and poorly thought out. Then you go on to try and compare it to chimpanzees, and the fact that chimps consume 10% plus of their calories from animal foods, both in the forms of meat. They actually have way more meat than people had previously thought. Jane Goodall and those types of researchers, it's come out more recently that they actually do hunt a lot more than that 2% meat that was originally thought of. And then they also eat insects and actively do that as well. Their diet's full of bark, roots, all sorts of things, including, yes, fruit and leaves and other things, but it looks nothing close to the 80-10-10 diet. So anyone still trying to make that comparison is very foolish and understands very little around our physiology and the physiology of apes and how drastically we're different from chimpanzees to begin with. And I've got a video of mine which you can check out here that talks about that, and I've got a link below as well. You then were bringing up something about how there's lots of movies to prove the points you're raising, and that would counter the movie I presented of the BBC one. You're saying that there's movies that will show that we're vegetarians. by all means post them. You say they're out there, but you don't actually provide the links. The BBC is a little bit more credible than just some random YouTuber making a video saying, this is why humans are designed as frugivores. And what happened to that first statement you made about, you fundamentally agree with me that we're omnivores, but now you're trying to argue that we were originally frugivores. It doesn't make sense that you're going back and forth on this issue. That's really why I wanted to make this video, is to show you that you're doing this and ask you, what do you actually believe? What is your stance? Instead, you're going on all these tangents and talking about this thing, that thing, and that validate your reasons for eating the way you do, and that simply wasn't the topic of the original video that you were responding to. Common dismissive tactic that I run up against is the attempt that people say I'm not worth listening to, or I'm not credible to listen to because I'm trying to sell something, whether it's a supplement or anything else associated with my ideology. Despite the fact that anyone else in the health community making YouTube videos is selling something, whether it's advertising, whether it's a book, all these things are selling something, so they have a motivation to keep doing what it is they're doing. The idea that you think I'm trying to sell paleo doesn't even make sense when you consider that if I were to stick raw in my username, I'd get 10 times the number of people watching my channel. It doesn't make any sense. If my main motivation in life was money, you wouldn't see me working in the health industry. Your point about paleo being the toughest time for humans shows even more lack of understanding of that time period that you're trying to criticize, and I cover it very completely in this video here as to how humans were actually thriving at that point. They were at their peak physical health, peak mental health, peak physical prowess, and their athleticism. Again, it's all covered in that video. Any anthropologist will corroborate this, that humans have fallen drastically in stature, strength, cognition, and this is something anthropologists agree on wholeheartedly. There's no debate here. That video covers it. I look at how there's a lot of very long-lived hunter-gatherers. You also have to take into account the fact that when you have exposure to the elements constantly, that detracts from life. When you don't have crisis care that we have today, that can detract from life. But when the pilgrims came over from Europe, the Indians and the natives were living about twice as long as the average pilgrim, the average European, who was on an agricultural diet, higher in carbohydrates, and the natives of that area were on a paleo diet, essentially, largely of hunted game, and they had phenomenal health. Lots of them lived to their 70s. Elders would often live to 100. You then try to say, let's choose the time period that we're drawing from to live our lifestyle, and you're trying to say our ancestors from 3+ million years ago, the Australopithecus afarensis. That species was drastically different to the humans today. That's the point I've been making. We've adapted to a new diet, and we've thrived on it. You're just saying we haven't thrived, but that doesn't do anything. I've covered it in my videos. I've got the references. Step up your game if you want to try and still make that point. Got a link below for the Australopithecus and the brain size and the drastic difference. Our brains are 3 times as big as they were at that point. The brain capacity of the Australopithecus was 35% of what it is today. And what's the big difference? Introduction of meat, introduction of cooking, and that balloons the brain into what we have today and what our ancestors had for millions of years. And you still show more lack of understanding of their diet when you say, oh, it was all fruits and vegetables. It was hard, dry nuts, beans, and hard little berries that were scavenged on the savannah, not in this imaginary jungle that people like in the fruitarian community like to imagine humans evolved in. It's pretty conclusive that humans evolved in Africa, and that was a dry place. Yes, there were rainy seasons, there was parts of Africa that would have had more jungles, but overall, this was not a thriving Costa Rican type jungle that they think existed there. Also, when you took that pineapple, that really proves my point that you know very little about our ancestors' past or even the past of that fruit. There's no pineapples in the wild. You can't just go pick something and eat it like that unless it actually exists. There's some sweet fruits seasonally in certain parts of Africa and around the world, but there's very little consistency in the availability of those things, especially in a place as dry and much more temperate as certain parts of Africa. And you talked about the hands, I covered that in the video again. Go back and watch that video that you're responding to, because I conclusively explained and gave references for how our hands evolved from the use of tools. Yes, we had the opposable thumbs from swinging through trees, but the dexterity and uniqueness of our hands have evolved from use of tools, hunting, using spears, and there's no denying that. Trying to say slaughterhouses are unpleasant places of work are a reason for us to not be omnivores, or proves that we weren't omnivores in the past, is a logical fallacy to the utmost degree. I don't buy my meat from places that use slaughterhouses. Anyone else can do that. Factory farming isn't the issue here. We're talking about real food from grass-fed, ethically slaughtered places that don't have these things you see in the PETA videos. I'm all for eliminating those types of environments. They're not conducive, obviously, to a sustainable future for our whole planet. You talked about how the best people in the world were vegetarians. You used Gandhi again as an example. Personally, I think Gandhi was pretty pathetic. He got some good results for his country, and I cheer him for that. But overall, his whole philosophy is one of pacifism, and I think pacifists are weak. That's just my conclusion. You don't have to agree. But that doesn't mean that he's the greatest mind ever. It doesn't mean that his uniqueness because he was vegan or vegetarian is valid. It doesn't even hold a place in this discussion. So I don't know why you're bringing these kinds of points up. It doesn't really help your stance. Your conclusion that I'm an egomaniac because I eat meat, let me see your psychological degree. I don't appreciate you trying to make those conclusions about me when you don't know me. You just see me on video again, you misunderstand the passion I have for debunking, stamping out misinformation and bad logic as being egotistical. It's simply not true. Then you're saying sorry and using this thinly veiled apology to slip that in is pretty pathetic. Like I keep saying, step up and address the facts. There's nothing more to it. You're trying to use these things that made no sense, saying an ape and a gazelle in a forest with me or a cow, then they'd survive and I wouldn't. Obviously, despite the discrepancies on the correct environment to live in for those animals, even using an ape and a cow as an example, first of all, a cow will definitely die in the wild pretty fast, so would an ape in a forest in North America. A lion in a forest in North America probably wouldn't do so well through the winter. I have certain amounts of survival skills. I haven't been trained that much in them. I'd like to improve that. Again, this has no bearing on survivability. You wouldn't be able to survive up in the Canadian forest with your skills. What would be even harder would be doing it in a tropical country where every 2 feet you step, there's parasites worming their way into your skin or something ready to cut and sting you and poison you. I'm actually running out of time on my camera, and I've addressed most of the points, and I think most people get the point, and it's quite clear that virtually your entire video doesn't even make sense to be a response to my original video, and your points themselves are pretty badly thought out, not based on anything that solid. One other quick one is the mention of excitotoxins coming from meat. Excitotoxins comes from things like MSG. I encourage you to look up that word. You need to learn what it is and what it means. It's not something that's found in meat. And as for my athletic abilities, despite the fact that I've made tons of videos on what I do for exercise, I don't choose to run marathons. That doesn't mean I'm less healthy than someone who chooses to. My dad runs marathons. He ran a sub 3-hour marathon in his early 50s. He still runs them, and he's mid-50s now, and he's an omnivorous diet. So just because someone does well at them on a high-food diet doesn't mean it's necessarily the most optimal thing. I eat an omnivorous diet, and I can work out. I do these things. I can meditate for hours on end. Doesn't really hold weight to try and use exercise abilities to promote a diet, in my opinion. It's something that's different from nutrition. They definitely work together, and there's definitely diets that detract from your athletic abilities. But using someone who's very proficient at their athleticism as an example for propping up a diet is really small-minded and is an example of correlation, again, not causation. To wrap things up quickly, you also talked about acidity in meat, the whole acid-alkaline thing. I made a video here you should definitely check out where I debunk the whole uric acid thing. And that's going to round up what I'm going to cover in this video. I have no interest in trying to force you to see things my way. If you can't actually think logically, then there's no hope for you. You might run into some health issues, you might not, and that might cause some change in your perception. But I just encourage you to actually think analytically and not from a place of dismissing something just because it doesn't conform to your exact ideals for what's optimal for people to be doing as a diet. So with that, thanks for watching, everyone. Leave your comments below what you think about this exchange. And with that, take care and embrace life without limits.
Again, correlation does not equal causation. Again, correlation does not equal causation. on